Manhwa title in the right corner of the screen. Enjoy watching.
This girl went to college to become a farmer because the future of the whole country depends on the land. But the mother didn't care. She was angry because of all people. It was her daughter who cared about the future of the country. Back then, no one even imagined that a daughter scolded for going to agricultural college would cause an agaric upheaval in another world. On a normal day, it was a girl just brewing coffee in her kitchen, and then she heard something like an explosion. She felt a severe headache, as if she was ready to pass out. And then it turned out to be in a completely different place, with dazzling lights and richly colored flowers. People in elegant dresses and suits, and at the center of it all, a man looking at her. He said he wanted to break his engagement with Lian. Feeling a strong headache again, the girl realized she remembered her past life. But now she was still facing Crown Prince David, who now wanted to break her engagement. He didn't believe that she could be really ill. He was sick of this pretense, and he'd suspected something wrong from the beginning. But he'd agreed to the engagement at his father's behest. And now there was a worthy replacement for Lian. The girl couldn't even say anything now, for it was all scenes from a novel she had read in a past life. The book was called I Became a Saint in Another World, which is what the title suggests. In this romantic fantasy, the main character is a person from another world, and now she is standing holding hands with David. Her name is Kansena. As in most stories, she charmed many fans with her sweet, mysterious character. But, of course, there are those who are constantly dissatisfied with the main character's charm and regularly humiliate her. This is a typical villain, Liana Pond. And right now, in real life, she remembered a past life. That was great. But Liana didn't understand why she was considered a villain. And even worse, that even with her past life memories, she couldn't change anything. This scene is her fiasco as the villainous hereditary Princess Liana is reduced to commoner status because her fiancé dumped her. Liana didn't understand why she was getting this kind of treatment. After all, she hadn't even rebuked Sayin for her lack of manners, or mocked her for wearing the same dress. And now the crown prince is unilaterally breaking off the engagement like this and humiliating Liana on her 20th birthday. Today on her birthday, David was supposed to propose to her and ended up dumping her. Immediately afterward, she took a carriage home and all the way she just cried, for the memories came back to her very late. Now that the engagement is broken, there's nothing else she can do to fix it. And at this rate, things are going to go according to the scenario from the novella. Liana arrived home. Her father immediately met her and told her that she was a disgrace to the family, so her name would be erased from the family tree. And if she has anything to say, this is her last chance. If you follow the story, Liana stubbornly resisted exile, and eventually she was thrown out into the street. But you can't survive in this world empty-handed, because even doctors' home visits are very expensive. So people with no money seek out shamans when they catch a disease, but the treatment from these same shamans is very nasty. Liana had been worried about such a thing all her life, but now if she was driven out of her family, she couldn't afford to get sick without money. The girl thought that the best solution would be to get on her knees right now and beg her father not to leave her. She promised that she would be good and live a quiet life. The Duke had not expected his daughter's last words to be just that, and then such a pleasant smile appeared on his face. And with that smiling face, he ordered to throw Liana away immediately. And so the gates of the house closed in front of her. In just a couple of hours, her life had been reduced to ashes. Of course, her father didn't give her a chance to take any extra things. He didn't even give her money. That way she certainly couldn't survive without anything. There was no point in continuing to shout at the gate. It turned out that a nanny and a carriage were already waiting nearby. Liana thought her father had taken pity and prepared a dwelling for his daughter after all. But that was not the case. The Duke ordered Liana to be taken away, but her nanny couldn't let the lady go like that, so she decided to go with her to her homeland. Of course, it is a long way there, but the lord of those lands is very kind and it is safe to live there. Liana is at a loss. In the end, she was really thrown away like in the original story. She didn't know what to do now. The nanny had tried to support Liana all the way and told her that the Duke definitely believed she wasn't at fault. And in this way, he just wanted to tell her to wait patiently until the public excitement calmed down. But Liana already knew that wasn't true, because in the novella, Liana never showed up in the last part, so this was her end. Left with no money in her pocket, she could get sick and die in an alley somewhere. It's just too horrible. If only her memories had come back a little earlier, maybe she could have made a difference. However, surely she could change things so that Crown Prince David wouldn't abandon her. This guy is the epitome of selfishness. He's too spoiled, noisy, has no manners at all. But it was apparently because of his character that he fell in love with Kang Sina, the girl who dared to speak to him as an equal. It's like, you're the first one who dared to hit me. Men like that look cool in novels, but in reality, you'd probably go crazy with them. Besides, even if he hadn't dumped Liena, it was unlikely she would have been able to live happily ever after. After all, she was already a puppet and nothing would have changed. The girl decided to consider that she had found true freedom and would finally start her real life from scratch. And so, by morning, they arrived at the place. Liena didn't realize what it was at first. The nanny tearfully said that was all she could do to help and apologized. Liena was grateful to the woman. After all, the nanny was taking such a risk for her, and the Duke might get angry if he found out. Liena said she would be sure to repay her kindness if they ever met again, to which Nanny said that when the lady was useful again, then the Duke would come back for her. Hearing this from the nanny was even more frustrating. They had essentially left Lean here for their own benefit later on, but the girl still hoped the nanny would never do that, and so they said goodbye. Liena decided to think positive. At least she wouldn't have to sleep on the bare ground. That's a good thing, she thought, and opened the door of the wooden house. But things didn't turn out so well. The nanny certainly did her best to help, but frankly, the state of this house is too terrible. Liena is definitely like a beggar now too. She was born with a silver spoon in her mouth and in an instant came to this. And rainwater was dripping everywhere from the roof of this house, and there was a lot of mold and spiders because of it. Still, Liena didn't despair. Life was a battlefield. She'd have to do something about this wreck that didn't even have food in it. But luckily, the girl has recently remembered her past life. She has volunteer experience, so she can handle cleaning and rebuilding the house. And she's certainly not going to sit around starving to death. A few months later, she was more or less able to live here. The locals still didn't see who lived in this dilapidated backwater. There were rumors that the Duke's daughter was here, but no one had ever seen her. And people even thought she was already dead. But when they entered her property, they saw a chicken next to the house. And then they noticed that this chicken looked like the one that had escaped from them not long ago. Now they were sure it was their chicken, but Liena was not far away. She heard their conversation and said that it was not their chicken because everything that had fallen on this land was now hers, and she would never give this chicken to her neighbors. Besides, it's a valuable source of protein. Then people finally paid attention to the man in rags. If it really is a lady, she looks very pathetic. And they were very frightened when this girl started to approach them. She was covered in dirt and torn clothes, but with a friendly smile, she handed them a hot, sweet potato. Fortunately, the climate here is pretty similar to what she's used to in Korea. In other words, it's perfect for crops. Liena was familiar with the local plants, and the land here was fertile, so she could find food. And the locals had no idea that something so delicious was growing in their land. No one would have thought of digging up a plant from the ground and cooking it that way. Now, thanks to Liena, they learned that such potatoes grow everywhere here. Then the neighbors finally got to know each other. Liena was finally able to ask them about the price of food in the area. For example, 3 apples cost 1 gold coin, but it was too expensive. Liena had no money at all, and to get money, she decided to sell 6 pieces of sweet potatoes for 1 coin. In the end, it has been 6 years since she arrived. The adaptation went by swiftly, and Liena gained a lot. Soon the locals began to call her by the red carpet of the bright color of her hair. But she's not mad. She has a good relationship with the residents. But of course things aren't as easy as they might seem. As early as 2 years ago, she realized that she couldn't survive on sweet potatoes alone because people were starting to harvest them on their own, and Liena needed a new crop. And then she noticed that the villagers sell apples as soon as they are ripe, so they are no longer in very good condition. The next big thing to sell will be beautiful apples. People here don't know the basics of farming. They don't realize how much hard work it takes to grow perfect apples. Liena worked very hard to grow the apples, and of course her hard work was rewarded. People were shocked to see such a perfect apple. And without even hearing Liena's opinion, they immediately brought this sumptuous treat to the lord of these lands. Liena hadn't given any permission yet, and they took her apple away, so she had to run after the crowd. In this commotion, the villagers presented the lord of these lands with a marvelous apple. The old woman was surprised that such a huge thing was an apple. It seemed as if magic was being used. Liena was a little embarrassed. Now was the first time she had seen the lord of these lands, but it was also nice to have someone praise her fruit like that. The girl confessed that she grew this apple herself and she's a genius farmer. From her red hair, this woman immediately recognized that Duke Pon's daughter was standing in front of her. The woman even has something about how Liena is doing here and how she herself is farming. Naturally, the woman had thought it was all a lie until now. The woman continued to marvel at this excellent apple, and then Liena said she would sell it for 1 gold coin. People were going to show it to the Lord as a gift, but Liena decided to charge for it. After all, it was as if the apple was her own. And the harvest was very small this year, only 20 apples. When the woman found out that there were as many as 20 of these apples, she of course decided to buy them all at once. She was also surprised because she could have paid much more for it than 1 gold coin. Liena was a very brave girl, but she didn't like gambling, so this price was good enough. Frankly speaking, the woman, the Lord, thought that the daughter would come crying to the turnovers of this estate after a week, but it did not happen. So the lady also learned how to grow fruit. Liena bragged about the peaches she grows, because they are the sweetest and most tender. They will melt in your mouth. And of course, she would like to grow more fruit. It sounded very tempting, and the woman couldn't help but succumb to just that, so she decided to hire Liena as a court gardener to grow fruit trees on the grounds of this estate. But Liena didn't want to work for anyone. It's much more profitable for her to grow and sell fruit on her own, so of course she refused. The woman didn't understand how Liena would handle everything alone then, and she had no one else to rely on. That's why Liena advised this lady to invest in her business, as well as provide protection and support. Such confidence pleased the lady very much, so she immediately agreed and trusted the lady. Liena immediately sold all her apples for as much as 20 gold coins, and the next year she grew peaches and sold them for even more. In just 1 year, her fruit became so famous that lords of neighboring lands began talking about it, offering sponsorship and purchase deals. Liena bought land, hired workers, and started raising livestock, so her life can be described as a resounding success that she is happy with. It has certainly been worth it. She had already made such a success in 6 years, and now the grandmother lord said that after rejecting Lady Liena so blatantly, Crown Prince David had recently married, he had become a king. If it weren't for his windiness, Liena could be queen right now. But luckily she's content with what she has now, and the Crown Prince's fate doesn't interest her at all. Liena loves farming too much to worry about such a thing. This life she has decided to spend as a successful farmer. This year's harvest was even bigger than the previous one, and Liena was selling the fruit in the neighboring village too. Another time when she was just walking the grounds and wondering what to plant next. She accidentally tripped and fell, and it hurt a lot. She turned around and tried to find out what had happened. She tripped over the hoe. It had perfect straight lines and was gracefully smooth. It was a very rare tool, so finding it here was a blessing. Liena didn't think she'd encounter a hoe in this world. Everyone here uses flower spades for farming, but now they'd be unnecessary when there's such a handy tool. Liena immediately loved it. Only then suddenly she started to hear someone's voice and saw the glow from that hoe. In her previous life, she would have been shocked if she suddenly started talking. But in this world, magic isn't that rare. Having a perfect adaptation to this world, Liena is no longer surprised. What's more, she can't miss the valuable talking hoe. After 4 years of farming, the hoe asked, "Are you my new master?" Liena said, "Yes." At that moment, magic surrounded her from all sides. It was a very powerful stream of force, so the girl didn't realize what was happening. Then she heard a voice say that the contract was done, and some kind of mark appeared on her arm. Suddenly, that hoe turned into a beautiful sword, and its name is Liu Garbong Bontuar. Liena has become its 10th master, and she should be honored. Looking back, however, she realized she would have been better off throwing that hoe away when she first spoke. If Louis were to retell the story of his creation, that 10 houses would not suffice, so briefly he said, "He is the sword forged by Bonaracle, the god of abundance, in 3 days and 3 nights. Abundance is part of the sword, so many have coveted it. But Louis is extremely demanding, a sword, so he only allowed himself to be wielded by those destined to become emperors. But 9 times was enough. At some point, more and more unskilled people tried to become his masters, so Louis got so tired that he hid and became a humble hoe on the farm. While he was telling, Liena was trying to somehow erase that magic circle on her hand. And Louis was telling her how glad he was that the master was able to recognize the true essence hidden beneath that humble form, and her eyes could see the beautiful flower buried in the dirt. Liena just understood it because it was a hoe, and now she's even upset that it's some kind of talking object. Louis claimed that Liena had the quality of a ruler. so he even blessed her. But Liena was sure that he made some mistake. After all, she is an ordinary farmer and doesn't even know how to hold a sword. Louis didn't care who she was. He had been in this form for a long time looking for a suitable master, and he had finally found one. Liena has wise and humble eyes, suitable to become Louis's master. Liena, however, was ecstatic, for she just wanted to do her farming. Well, with the hope that she wouldn't be bothered by that talking sword, it was nothing special in this world. She had already made peace with it. Louis was very boastful, but Liena doesn't have a family and she's bored, so he can be her conversation partner. Only Louis had gone a little overboard. He wanted his master to entertain him until he was old and gray. After a while, Liena went to her grandmother's tea party and brought some delicious fruit. They were discussing how suddenly the trees and firewood had started to grow extremely vigorously lately. Sunshine, the weather is really nice. It's like God is helping this year, but it turned out to be more than just on the plants. Also, when a dog gives birth, it always has 8 puppies. And when a hen lays eggs, they always have 2 yolks. Now people are looking for eggs without double yolks for treatment. Some find it strange, but it's still good to live surrounded by abundance. Liena was just glad with the day. Her grandmother was much more cautious than she saw it as something strange. Then she noticed that Liena's arm was bandaged. The girl said it wasn't a wound, it was just an incident, but it was fine. Grandma was curious to know more about it, so Liena simply said that when she was walking around the farm, she got a strange tattoo, and to avoid attracting attention, she bandaged her arm. She showed her grandmother this mark, and the woman suddenly got a headache. She told her to hide that tattoo and to go to her place early today. Grandma wasn't the type to send people away just because they weren't feeling well, so something had gone wrong. Liena returned home, not letting go of the thought of what had happened. She decided to have a little chat with Louis and build a relationship with him. He was very angry now, or rather, even upset, all because he knew how Liena used the other sword. He meant the knife she used to cut the melon. That was already cheating. Liena couldn't carry a weapon in front of her mistress, so she had to leave Louis. He would be more upset if she showed it in the guard's hands or left it on the ground. In all this time, no man had dared to treat him like that. Liena didn't want to leave him in this mood, so she started complimenting Louis. He's a narcissist, of course, so he felt better right away. Liena promised that next time she would definitely take it with her and brag to everyone about how cool it was. The soul of that sword seemed like a truly living thing, and he made her promise. Not only can this sword speak, but it can also change its shape freely. It also emits light like a flashlight. Liena thought the shape of the hoe was the best, but it was a shame about the sword. He said that everything that is happening in the area now, the cattle are giving birth to great offspring, and fruits and crops are yielding abundant harvests. This is all due to his blessing. He is created with the utmost devotion by the God of abundance, and the land where he lives yields crops and livestock multiply. Liena didn't really believe it, but she agreed with what Louis was saying. It was getting dark, so she had to go quickly and check out the harvest field. Louis flew nearby and nonstop claimed to be the right hand of the rulers. When there is plenty of food, people will gather and naturally state names will form. So ancestors have been creating civilizations on rich lands since ancient times. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door of the house. Liena heard a male, unfamiliar voice. Besides, there was no one else coming at this hour, so she tensed. There was glass and a curtain on the front door, so she could see that there were not one, but several stout young men standing there. That seemed suspicious, and Louis was excited. He wanted to show off his skills as soon as possible and wash this passageway with a sea of blood. Liena let him know right away that he wouldn't have that opportunity, but still asked the sword to stay close and not move until she called him. Liena gathered her courage and she opened the door. This guy, when she saw him with her own eyes, she was shocked, for he was truly handsome. The first thing he said was, "I found you, thieving cat!" His choice of words was completely out of keeping with his elegant face and clothes, which simply mesmerized Liena. Because of this, she didn't immediately realize it herself as she said, "Aren't you my little kitten?" It was a stupid question to this guy's equally stupid words. All was well in the neighboring empire, but one day the empress suggested that the emperor should get a divorce. This had never happened before, so he was shocked and did not want a divorce. But the empress was not afraid of being first. However, she would not have minded being first in another sense. For example, being the first wife who could not bear the tedious process of divorce and would kill her husband. After that, she thought her existence would be forgotten. Plus, she had traveled far away after the divorce. But now, after all these years, her grandson, the current Emperor Cayman Marshal, has come to visit her. She now lived in these lands. But of course, her grandson still thought of her as the Empress, though it had been a long time since that had been the case. Her grandmother had hoped that the Emperor would treat her as a simple Lady Aurelian. Cayman said that he really liked the fruits that his grandmother sent him, although he did not immediately realize that the fruit was a gift brought by Bonera's blessing. Grandma wanted to send Liena's fruit to her children because it looked beautiful. But of all things, there was such a misunderstanding. The sacred sword disappeared, and from the imperial palace at the same time as the Empress divorced. And it also became clear that Postina had an unusually offensive harvest. And of course, the Emperor doesn't believe the two events have anything to do with each other. Grandma was absolutely not ashamed of anything. She was honest the day she gave up the marshal name. She left everything in the imperial palace and took nothing. The sword the Emperor speaks of is not in her possession now, but she has admitted that one of hers rose for a shoulder contract with that sword. Cayman couldn't believe it and questioned his grandmother. Yes, it was rude, but grandmother told the truth. The person who became the owner of this sword is named Liena, and she is a simple farmer. That's why. And immediately after receiving this information, Cayman went to her house to find out everything in person. Liena still didn't understand why these people had come to her. Oh, and besides, it was clear from this guy's clothes that he was high status, but he was talking to her respectfully. Did he mention anything about a cat before? It was a very strange situation, but Liena was actually glad that such a handsome man called her a kitten. Whatever the case was, she was going to listen to this entrance. She believed this guy wasn't a criminal who broke into a lonely girl's house. When she said that, the knight behind her started yelling at her for being so insolent. But they themselves had come to her at this hour. Liena wasn't going to treat them politely. That made the knight blend in even more. But with a flick of this guy's hand, he was silenced, further confirming his high status. Liena had so many questions she wanted to ask. She wondered who it was and why he was looking for her. But she wasn't about to give in to the provocation on the stairs. This guy said he was the owner from the ball that was now in her hands and had come to get that sword back. Liena was shocked. It turns out Louis has another owner and he lied to her? Louis immediately said that he didn't, and that she was the only owner. The situation was incomprehensible. Liena didn't know which of these two to believe, but this guy's face looked very truthful. Cayman didn't understand why this girl was talking to the sword. After all, he had never heard Louis's voice himself. Liena didn't understand. After all, the guy claimed to be the owner of the sword, but he doesn't know it? The guy is aware that this sword has a will, but has never spoken to him. Liena decided to check and asked, "Is this sword very quiet and calm?" And the guy said it was, so it turned out he was lying. Liena asked what he really wanted, and if he lied now, she wouldn't open that door again. The boy said his name was Cayman, and that he was Lady Aurelian's grandson. Liena didn't even know a person with that name, she didn't care. Only then did the guy say the name of the lord of these lands was Aurelian. Liena immediately realized it was her grandmother. After spending several years together at tea parties, she asked to be called grandmother. So Liena had even forgotten about the name. So, Cayman said that this sword was a very valuable item that only the head of their family could use. And after the grandmother was born and left, the sword disappeared too. Louis even started to get a little nervous. He didn't want to tell the truth, but he didn't deny it either. Cayman had said he would properly compensate for the loss of the sword. Liena understood the situation, but even if she wanted to give up that sword, Louis just wouldn't let go of her. He would fly around at night crying and begging her not to leave or give him away. He wanted to live next to Liena until his hair turned gray. This was the first time people saw the sword move by itself, but it confirmed that Liena was the true owner of the sword. Louis was very hurt. This family really considered it their family heirloom, but they would never really care about it. They don't even know his real name. Liena decided to check this and asked Cayman what the real name of this sword was. But he didn't remember. He only knew Louis, and yet he dared to recognize himself as its owner. What a shame. Now, anyway, since it wasn't his sword, Liena couldn't give Louis up and asked the men to leave. However, Cayman couldn't leave so easily. After all, the value of the symbolism of this sword is much greater than what an ordinary person can imagine. Cayman needs to obtain this sword, even if he has to use a slightly devious method. This sword has a will of its own. Still, Liena couldn't give it up unless he himself wanted it. Cayman insisted that the sword was a weapon, and only the will of the young lady mattered here. Cayman didn't want to use it against such a fragile girl, even if he was the most powerful man in this world. He asked, would she definitely say no? Liena stood by her opinion. This was the final decision. Cayman suddenly moved very close to her. It was so disconcerting. Apparently, this really is the insidious method he's talking about. But Liena, not letting him get any closer, stopped him outright, Lips calling him her little kitten again and telling him to be careful what he was doing. Liena was sure he was going to propose marriage of convenience to her, but he didn't even have that thought in his head. However, then, he thought about it. If he married this girl, the property would be jointly owned, and that was the only legal way to wield this sword. He's an emperor, and he didn't even think of such a thing, and some farm girl immediately realized it. She had better not give him that idea, for immediately afterward came and proposed marriage to her. He didn't look like he was lying, was leaving, and thus should get a marriage proposal? Still nice, from the crown prince. Liena never waited for that. The only thing missing now was a huge floral bouquet. His proposal is too insensitive, and he should at least get down on one knee. Well, taking her advice, he immediately did the right thing. Liena looked at him with delight for a few seconds, and then with a smile on her face, she simply refused his offer. And then, without giving him time to react, she walked straight through the doors in front of him. The emperor himself and the knights were in great shock at this behavior. Then they even began to shout. But Liena just ignored it and went about her business. In any case, she wasn't going to leave the house today. Cayman was completely fooled. He felt as if he had been bewitched. The round face and that wavy red hair, the tight-fitting modest straw hat and the small brown eyes. But this appearance is completely inconsistent with this girl's actions. The emperor has never been teased like this before. After that, he went to his grandmother's mansion. Although he had to go home, he decided to stay here for a while. Grandmother was sure that the emperor would take Liena with him to the empire right away, but he ended up falling for her tricks. Cayman told how the feisty girl had convinced him that the only legitimate way to master the weapon was to marry, and insisted on the proposal. Grandmother was surprised. She of course knew that Liena was a brave girl, but she didn't even think that she would dare to suggest something like this to the emperor. And she was even more surprised when she found out that Cayman had proposed to her after all, but Liena had slammed the door right in his face. Cayman couldn't go back empty-handed, his pride wouldn't allow it, so he decided to get Liena. Now it was getting more interesting. The man who had always followed the object path, known for his cold and indifferent disposition, was now reveling in emotion like this. Perhaps too careless to assume that something romantic was brewing, but at least spring would come for Cayman. Grandmother had high hopes for that, and besides, she treasured her grandson and Liena very much. After 2 days of hiding with a suspicious blonde man, Liena had a dream. She saw a mountain spirit. He gave her a riddle. Yellow, soft, and sweet. What could it be? Liena immediately realized it was a pumpkin and woke up. It was a ridiculous dream, but it got Liena thinking. Pumpkin is so delicious. With a soft texture and sweet flavor, would be very interesting to add to noodles. The hour struck. Liena was confidently determined to slay all enemies and enjoy the harvest, so she told Louis to get ready. Sword thought that by harvest she meant to gather the heads of her enemies and show them off to everyone. Louis really wanted to do that, but it's too grim a crop. Liena wore some shabby clothes for the battle and didn't tell Louis what they were going to do until the very end. Then she explained to Louis in detail what shape it should take. It was a first for him. It took the shape of perfect handy garden shears with a very sharp blade. Louis was resentful that his mistress had tricked him, and now he had to be a regular scissors, and the juice ran down him. It was very sticky. Liena only laughed off that. Louis had always been bathed in blood, but now so squeamish about plant juice. Suddenly, Cayman was nearby. He heard Liena's voice, so he was able to find her and offered his help to carry those pumpkins. He had hoped the sword would be with the lady, but thought he was mistaken. And then he noticed that those strange scissors in her hands were too perfect, and that's when he realized it was the sword of ego. Liena pretended that Louis was very fond of serving her just like that and helping her, though it didn't seem like Louis was agreeing with that. Cayman, one of those very possessed men, is going to save that sword, and with it, take the lady for himself. Liena and Cayman took a few cases of pumpkins to the warehouse. After all, you have to wait about 20 more days, and then you can raise the price and sell those pumpkins. Cayman helped her, so in gratitude, she decided to treat him to a very tasty meal, a meal blessed by the mountain god. This was the first time the emperor had seen such food, and thought that all commoners ate such food, but only Liena could cook it. This soup was very unusual and strange, yet so delicious that Cayman couldn't stop. Liena just enjoyed this guy's beautiful face while he ate, and then brought him some homemade tea to drink. The flavors she hadn't shared this with anyone yet. But to such a handsome man, she decided to offer it. Liena dug an ice cave because she often gets hot and now she can make ice, so she put it in her tea. Cayman was surprised that such a girl could dig a cave with a shovel. He told her she'd better ask for help next time. But such tricks won't work on her. She has no need to ask for help if she can do something on her own. That made Cayman smile. She was rather unusual after all, and the man was becoming more and more interested in her. A few years ago, a black-haired angel descended to Earth in the Barker Kingdom. Some people thought she was a demon, while others assured that they should show their reverence and respect for the guest. Many sought to use her for political purposes. Eventually, the girl fell in love with the crown prince and became engaged to him. She's now the crown princess. However, life doesn't end with falling in love. Kang Sena bursts into the office to talk to David. Her face had once charmed him, but now he was annoyed at the sight of Sena. He told no one to let anyone into the office, but she came anyway. Sena was very unhappy that David had started avoiding her. She couldn't even remember the last time they had a normal conversation. And David couldn't see that she wanted to have a normal conversation with him because she was acting too emotional and yelling and making trouble all the time. Recently, she had gotten angry because he had danced with Lady Althea. Before that, she was upset that he didn't give her the mermaid she really wanted. Sena really blamed him for all of this because he wanted to make that lady his concubine, and about the mermaid's tear. It was now adorning the neck of the princess of a neighboring kingdom, and of course Sena was upset. David has explained to his fiancée many times that the position of queen is a very important political tool for the king, and he has given the title to her, so she can't demand so much from him. Sena couldn't accept such a cowardly excuse. She has no one here but her fiancé, she has no family or friends, only David, and now she's going to pick concubines like a flower bouquet for the sake of politics. David thought that he was right in this situation, because there was nothing more important to the king than politics. But Sena still called it another excuse. In the end, David only proved his weakness. Even now, instead of talking and discussing calmly, he simply kicked Sena out of his office with the help of the guards. The girl didn't understand what had happened to her beloved. He was a beautiful man who had sworn eternal love, and now he was gathering a harem of concubines and behaving like this. I didn't know what to do because it wasn't in the novella. David didn't know what to talk to Sena about. She keeps mentioning some serious conversation, but that only happens if people can hear each other. The crown prince was already busy with many problems, and now he was reaping the benefits of the conflict with Duke Pond. In an attempt to strengthen his sacred authority, the cathedral had recognized Kang Sena as a saint, so the marriage contract had been hastily adopted, and the crown prince had decided to betroth her. David was sure that Duke Pond would beg to take Liena as a concubine to the palace, but that was not to be, and events took a very different turn. The Duke had abandoned his daughter, dubbing her the disgrace of the family and earning her the recognition of society. The prince could never have imagined such a thing. Liena has not only lost her title as crown princess, but has been abandoned by her father, who relies on the support of the nobility. The Duke joined the second prince's faction with the help of public support, and now he poses a threat to the crown prince. Plus, David was beginning to think more and more, after the fight with his fiancée, that Liena had never acted like this, and the day had come when he began to miss her. So he instructed his men to find Liena, but they searched the entire duchy and never found the girl. This really annoyed the prince. He thought that the Duke was trying to deceive everyone, but it turned out that he really kicked out his daughter. And now the prince began to worry how a woman who could only embroider could survive among the commoners. After the engagement, there's no use for Sena, so there's no point in keeping the title of crown princess for her. David began to wonder what would happen if Liena was reinstated as crown princess. Then Duke Pond will take the crown prince's side again. The family's betrothed lady will fall at her feet with tears of gratitude to David. He thought it was a brilliant plan, so he ordered to track down Liena as soon as possible. Cayman kept thinking about Liena. She's so strange. What could she do with those hands that looked like they could break at a touch? And besides, she said she dug an ice cave, didn't she? It was very hard to imagine how she did it alone. And that was why the emperor had been pensive and silent all day. To store ice, you need to put it in the refrigerator. But ice is something that cannot be bought with any money. It is provided by the magicians from the magic tower. Hardly any ordinary people are familiar with sources of sustenance and know how to get ice without magic. You need someone who can give advice from their own experience, such as Liena. As soon as that name appeared in Cayman's mind, he actually saw Liena in front of him. She didn't expect to meet him so suddenly. She had just come to visit her grandmother, and her grandson happens to live here too. Liena, did you notice the abrasion on Cayman's beautiful face? Apparently it's from standing in the hot sun all day without a hat, and now he's got burns. Liena had brought something with her for just such an occasion. Although such scratches could be quickly cured with a healing potion, it was possible to just not spend any money on it. Liena pulled something out of the fruit basket and smeared it on Cayman's face. She told me that it's cool aloe and it works perfectly with burns because of its refreshing effect. Her grandmother has a similar plant at home, called agave, but Liena doesn't know what the difference between them is. That's what she's about to try to find out. The emperor drew his conclusions by talking to the common people who developed their wisdom for the sake of survival. He asked if Liena had been given this knowledge by her parents. She said she had no parents. But then I saw the shocked look on the guy's face and realized I had misspoken, so I had to explain everything. She has parents, but she's not their natural daughter, plus they disowned her. Cayman straight up froze upon hearing this and didn't know what to say. He seemed like a good man, so Liena told him a little of her life. She was adopted at a young age and was abandoned by her family after an embarrassing breakup of her engagement. But living alone turned out to be not so bad. Liena's fine with everything, and she's living her best life right now. She's free to do whatever she wants. Cayman was curious to know more. He had it written right on his face, but he politely decided not to ask such a thing. It was so sweet of him that Liena laughed and even stroked his face. Only later, when he blushed, did she realize that she shouldn't have gotten so close so quickly, and the atmosphere between them was very strange at that moment. Grandma wanted to see what all the commotion was about and went out into the hallway, but she didn't expect to see Liena and Cayman. Just by looking at these little rascals, it was immediately clear what was going on between them. Grandmother approached Liena and the emperor. Even though he was her grandson, she had always called him Your Majesty, but now he was hinting at her to address him as her grandson. Grandma immediately realized that he still hadn't told Liena about being an emperor. Not only did they meet, but they also ate together. She also applied some medicine on his face. You could tell they were already close, but she still didn't know who he really was. The grandmother decided to help these young people and said that it was better to put away all this officialism and talk without formalities. After all, they were the same age and could become good friends in this quiet town. The emperor did not understand how such a thing was possible after all. Mutual respect was necessary, so he addressed everyone respectfully. But as soon as Liena found out that they turned out to be one-skinned, she said that it was fate, and immediately forgot about all formalities, calling Cayman by his name. Grandmother and Liena were obviously laughing at him. Cayman was a little embarrassed, but still decided to agree with them. Liena invited them to try the watermelon. She put different fruits in the watermelon, added juice, ice, berries, and it turned out very beautiful. It was the first time the emperor and grandmother had seen such beauty, and they could already imagine the labor with which Liena had carved all those fruit figures. Liena wouldn't tell what trick she used to do it, because she actually made Louis take different forms. He hated it, though. Cayman couldn't believe that Louis hadn't helped with this and kept asking questions. Liena just wanted to cover his mouth, so she poked a fruit cordial and shoved it right into Cayman's mouth. Of course he was embarrassed that she had done that, but then he was surprised. The fruit was so sweet, or perhaps it was sweet because of the fact that Liena had given it to him. Either way, this watermelon was sweeter than any other. At first, Cayman thought it was just a coincidence, but now he was convinced that the property was different. Maybe it was the difference between the way it was grown in the empire and here. Before meeting Liena, the emperor had only thought about how to defeat the nobles in the pursuit of the crown and consolidate imperial power. He had never been a laborer. He had never been interested in the lives of the common people, what the things he eats are made of, and now he felt shame for it. Also today, he tried something new. Liena made grape juice from leftovers and said it was very tasty and healthy. Cayman didn't understand how it could be delicious, since leftovers carried no value in the market. But Liena took it much easier. Even if the leftovers had no value, it didn't mean the juice was bad. There was just as much love and effort put into it. It also happens with people. A person's value may be lowered by bad rumors or malicious slander, but their essence will not change. At first, Cayman was just going to take the sword away, but now he's wondering why he chose Liena as his master. Cayman really wished he could talk to her more. As she was leaving the mansion, she waved at Cayman. He was on the balcony, but even from afar, Liena shone so brightly. Cayman's heart began to beat faster and his face turned red. Cayman heard it, but he didn't want to admit it. Liena would calmly come home with a full basket. Her grandmother had packed her salmon, ham, and so many other condiments, and Liena loved her grandmother for that. Also, Grandma is always very generous with praise for the food, so Liena comes to see her very often. This woman is really honest and spares no words for what she likes. Liena was happily walking home, thinking about what she would make of this salmon. Suddenly, right outside, Louis flew up to her. He was furious that they were partying without him. Liena had promised that she would take the punch and go straight home, but the time ended up being close to midnight. She had tricked him. Liena had really forgotten about the time and was now very disappointed. He also didn't want Liena to get close to that bastard Cayman. She didn't understand why. Louis had told her how cruel the Marshall family was. At first, they would be nice to whoever they wanted, as long as they were treated to good food and funny stories. But once their interest wanes, they'll take Louis, even if they have to cut off Leon's hand. This was the first time Liena had heard the last name Kamina, and it sounded very familiar. But it had been so long since she'd been out in the high society that she wouldn't remember who that surname belonged to. Anyway, Louis told her to never be without her loyal protector and not to fall for the tricks and appearances because the Marshall family are the real demons. Liena pretended to believe it. She asked Louis if she had decided to stay with her forever. After all, there was nothing like a section of enemy heads in her life. Louis didn't care about that. He only wished to serve the master he had chosen. But it seemed as if there was something he wasn't telling her. Liena thought he had a far more suffocating reason for running away from home. He'd been flying calmly the whole way, but now he was suddenly hiding, making it look like a regular sword. 3. Liena didn't understand why, and then she saw the babysitter come to her house. They hadn't seen each other in a very long time. 4. The nanny didn't expect to run into Liena like that and thought she was still living in the house the nanny had left her. Liena still wouldn't live in that wreck. That house needed repairs anyway, and it was easier to just move out. 5. Liena is happy to see the nanny after all this time, but she has some bad feeling because the nanny has never once visited her in all these years. So why has she come now, so unexpectedly? 6. Liena even kindly offered Nanny a choice of teas, but reminded her that Nanny likes chamomile tea. 7. When the tea was ready, Nanny had already had time to look around. Even by the kind of cup and the state of the house, it was clear that Liena was living well. 8. Nanny was sure that it was the lord of these lands who had bailed Liena out a few years ago, and it was probably all thanks to her, since she too was having a break with her long-term situation after her divorce. So could take pity on the broken and abandoned lady. 9. Liena says the nanny is wrong and the grandmother has no interest in this. Liena survived only through her own efforts and lives alone. 10. I still didn't believe it and thought Liena was lying after all. She's just a lady who isn't even capable of earning money. It was very rude, not overt, and looked down on Liena, deciding she had no need to be nice since she was no longer the Duke's daughter. Liena had no intention of tolerating such an attitude. She said that this chamomile tea cost 1 coin and Nanny wanted to believe it. She wanted to disbelieve it. She had behaved inappropriately and wouldn't even acknowledge the effort. Liena had nothing to talk about with someone like that, so she told her not to leave. The nanny had asked for just 1 minute. She had come to tell her that the Duke had ordered Liena to be brought home. It was very shocking news. Nanny told how hard it had been for the Duke after Liena's departure, and that he had been wondering if something had happened to her. But that was too obvious a lie. Now he had just suddenly thought of a new use for Liena, and it's no care at all. But Liena isn't interested in that anymore. She doesn't care about her family and she doesn't want to see them. So told the babysitter to just leave. Which, well, she didn't. But she said she would report it to the Duke and also pass on the lady's witticisms. Liena said lastly that she cursed the Duke from top to toe. After that, she was finally alone. But she didn't feel so good after such a sudden guest. The next day, Cayman contacted his sister Reese through the magic ball. She was interested in when he was going to return, for she had not stopped the Emperor from treating in foreign lands for so long. After the divorce, Grandmother returned to her homeland, but no one had any idea what lay ahead. So the state granted her the Postina lands in the border territory neighboring the empire. The former emperor missed his wife with all his soul, It had cost him a lot of effort to create a sleep teleportation connecting the two regions. And back then, no one could think that it would be useful in today's time. Cayman didn't have to spend the night in Postina and could have just used the teleporter, but he hadn't. And now he was ashamed in front of his sister and Susan. Reese gave only 2 reasons why her brother was allowed to stay in Postina. Either he was busy with the sword persuasion, or if he was in love for the first time in his life. Cayman said that was definitely not the case, which was why his sister made him return to the Empire faster. Though in reality, Liena does not leave his thoughts even during the meetings. One of the knights reported to the Emperor that something fishy was going on in Postina. Some visitors had been spotted at Lady Liena's house, and they seemed to be following her closely. Plus, she was escorted out the other day by some maid who happens to be connected to the Watchers. But what are they trying to accomplish with this kind of surveillance? Judging from Lady Aurelian's words, these people might be related to Lady Liena's former fiancé. As soon as Cayman remembered what she had said about her ex-fiancé, he immediately became angry. How only she had the nerve to come back after her fiancé dumped her so easily and disgraced her. Plus, Liena had blossomed as a farmer. Cayman immediately put all his business aside and decided that he had to save Liena. He went to her house. They had agreed to become friends, but did those friends really have to deal with a friend's ex-fiancé? Cayman didn't know who Liena's ex-fiancé was, but he imagined he'd be on his knees apologizing if he only knew the Emperor's title. Cayman began to look for an excuse for himself. Why was he even so angry about this? And he came up with the idea that if Liena was kidnapped, the sword would disappear with her. One should definitely control that situation. So he has good intentions. What if this scoundrel takes Liena away by force? Or worse, begs for her return after realizing her worth? Liena seems resilient on the surface, but in her heart, she suffers from loneliness. Cayman couldn't let that happen, so he quickly ran to her house and went to check the situation. When he got to the door of her house, he heard a loud scream. So without knocking, he just walked in. Liena screamed and begged for help because the boards from the ceiling suddenly began to fall. Eventually, with his help, she was able to change that part of the ceiling and fixed the whole thing herself. This 85-year-old house repaired the ceiling corner. The answer shally boards, bugs started crawling out of the rotten wood. It was a very ugly sight. Liena has already ripped out the ruined part, but she still has new boards to replace it, so you don't have to worry. Cayman was surprised to learn that Liena usually does all the repairs alone. She cannot hire a carpenter because there is no professional carpenter in this village. And even if there was a carpenter here, it would be strange for a single girl to invite him home. Liena can handle the repairs herself after a long time of living on her own. And it's Cayman who hasn't seen the ruins she used to live in. That house was cracking at the seams. Liena had to swallow the thatch roof and build a fence, and it was very annoying. It was as if the nanny was jealous of the welfare, so she would settle for Liena's predicament. By the way, Liena was using Louis as a hammer again. He didn't like it, of course, being used as a tool, but Liena always complimented and thanked him enough. Still, Louis's hammer wasn't the best choice, so he suddenly started flying sideways somewhere. It was unexpected, and Liena ended up accidentally falling right on top of Cayman. She hadn't felt another's warmth in a long time, but now, facing him so close, she felt warm. It was also thanks to his big body that she didn't hurt herself. So of course she thanked him, and he was so glad she wasn't hurt, and he even stroked her hair. Liena was so embarrassed she immediately blushed and noticed the atmosphere that arose between them. The man she was used to teasing was close to being a man in her eyes. Liena had completely forgotten that this guy was incredibly handsome, and now that his face was so close, she just couldn't look at him. After going over all the points, he was in every sense the perfect candidate for a husband. Liena immediately decided to move away from him. Oh, and besides, she was blushing so much, which made him start to worry and follow her. He took her hand, but Liena felt like she was going to die of arrhythmia at this rate. There was a small abrasion on her arm from the fall, and Cayman is great at applying bandages, so he offered to help her. As a ducal daughter, this wasn't the first time Liena had found herself in this situation, but for some reason her heart was pounding so frantically right now. Cayman was worried and concerned for her. When he helped her bandage her arm, he was about to leave, but she offered him lunch before he left. Even here, he showed concern. He didn't want to burden an injured person, so he still left, but told her to contact him if she still needed help. After all, she didn't have to take it all on herself. Louis flew to the master, and he apologized for what happened. Louis had completely forgotten how weak Liana was compared to him, but Liana was grateful to him now, so much so that she even kissed him, because thanks to her, she had a chance to get into the arms of a beautiful man. Stone is so beautiful that loser David is no match for him. He's got a nasty temper and a face like a dried squid. But Cayman only wants Louis. That's why he proposed at the first meeting. It's all for Louis. But even if he's using seduction tactics, he's too handsome to resist. Liana was now beginning to understand why emperors throughout history went after beautiful people. But she still felt bad that he left with an empty stomach, so she decided to make him something like a sandwich and some potatoes. Louis casually asked Liana, "What if that man turned out to be the emperor?" Liana only laughed. Cayman really is good enough to be emperor. It's a crime not to be the main character with a face like that. Louis was about to say that he was really the emperor, but suddenly someone knocked on the door. It was late, and Liana thought it was Cayman, who couldn't live without her food after all. She opened the doors joyfully, sure she would see her friend, but suddenly her face changed. It was already night. Cayman was still working. No matter how much he worked, he never ran out of things to do. But even as he worked, he was constantly remembering the situation that had happened today, and his mind was a mess because of it. Grandmother came to the emperor at such a late hour she brought him a snack, for she thought he might be hungry. Cayman didn't understand why his grandmother had brought him sandwiches, since he was planning to go to bed soon and this was a full meal. She told him to just try it and then complain, and when he did, he was surprised. It was very tender and delicious. Grandmother heard that the emperor had helped Liana today, and taking advantage of the moment, he asked, "Do all commoners always dump all the work on themselves? After all, when you have money, you can entrust it to someone else." And Grandma said it's very dangerous for a woman living alone to claim she has money, and admirable that Liana manages everything on her own. Liana had brought these potato sandwiches as a thank you for her help, but she looked kind of pale. Cayman was starting to worry about this. He told Liana to get more rest, but she wouldn't listen. He decided to visit her tomorrow and thank her, and at the same time check on her wrist. Just thinking about her made his face slightly flushed and a smile appeared on his face. Cayman realized that he was just looking for an excuse to see her. But suddenly he heard a noise. The windows immediately came into view, and he thought it was a mercenary. He was already ready to fight, but he saw that Louis' sword was outside the window. He flew around and tried to say something, but Cayman couldn't hear the sword spirit's voice. However, he realized that something urgent had happened, and it was probably related to Liana. She, meanwhile, was lying in her house feeling ill. After just one encounter with that man, it still had to happen, but the stress was inevitable. Liana held out hope. This was family after all. But when she saw her father on the doorstep, she still let him in, as well as her nanny. Father said he'd felt himself fading all this time, fending off the calmness about Liana. Except he looked like he hadn't changed at all. Liana didn't understand what was happening now, and besides, that didn't happen in the original story. Kang Sina got engaged 2 years after appearing in this world, and then by marrying David, that story ended. But things went weird from the start. Unlike the original, Sena got engaged right after coming here, and Lian was abandoned even though she hadn't done any evil deeds. Everything had sped up too much for some reason, and Liana didn't remember the story itself very well, so she assumed this story was after the denouement. Liana should have died in the first place, unable to endure their hardships here. But she's alive, and now there was a man who didn't care if she survived or not. The Duke certainly didn't care about Liana, for he had 5 more daughters to marry. Her father was still trying to pretend that he was afraid that helping her would incur the wrath of the royal family, and thankfully his assumptions were correct. She humbly accepted her punishment, so the prince took pity on her, and now Mystery is looking for her. He remembers her soft and submissive nature. Liana immediately realized that Fetch just needs the support of the Hart family again, because he took a woman from another world without support, so he cannot gain power. On the contrary, he faced pushback, knowing on that ruthless and signal bride who has no flaws. And now he wants Liana back to strengthen the bond, but she's not about to agree to any entreaties. The title of Crown Princess no longer had anything to do with her. Liana told her father to think of younger sisters who could be made into Crown Princesses and to leave. Her father had said that one word could not break a blood bond, and Liana had only laughed. After all, he was the one who had banished his child with a single word. Once he finally got angry and stood up, Liana swung the doors open and showed him out. He was gone, of course, but he wasn't likely to give up that easily. Liana was worried that Crown Prince David might come here next time, and that would be even worse. Liana can't stand idly by and let someone interfere in her life. If that happens, the only thing she can do is leave here. Liena didn't notice herself as she began to cry. She felt fine, but for some reason the tears kept flowing from her eyes. And for the first time she felt sadly about not being able to address the man. But even so, he tried to hug Liena and comfort her. However, then she felt sick when she went to bed, and Louis was so concerned that he decided to seek help. Cayman ran to her house very quickly and woke her up, of course. He asked where the medicine was that could help her. Liena pointed to the bag around the room. He wondered why she needed such a large suitcase. Liena said she was going to leave soon. She had to hurry. Cayman asked why, since he thought this was her home. Poston is certainly nice. The place is warm and cozy. Grandma is a good person too. But Liena has no place she can call home. Soon she was able to sleep peacefully because Cayman didn't ask too many questions and gave her the medicine, then wiped her forehead all night. He speculated as to why Liena had decided to run away so desperately, and of course he realized it was all because of her fiancé, who must have realized her worth, determined to win her back. Liena was even crying in her sleep, and it made Cayman feel sad. Liena, who is always bright and smiling, is now so defenseless and crying. If it's because of that guy, then... Cayman had already made up his mind to protect Liena no matter who she was. He even kissed her hands and watched over her until the morning. Morning came as soon as Liena woke up. Louis immediately flew up to her because he was worried. In his whole life, he had never seen such a weak master. Liena thought she had slept for a very long time, but then Cayman came out of the kitchen wearing an apron and said she hadn't slept very long at all. Liena, why is that handsome man in a frilly apron in her house? But she was grateful to see such a thing. She learned later that it was the sword that had called him here when she was sick. Cayman had already made breakfast. It was a little surprising, but it turned out to be very tasty. During the meal, he asked Liena where she was going to go. The girl thought she had blurted it out in her sleep, but Cayman said he knew it when he looked at the bag. Liena doesn't want to leave Poston for good, but she needs to go away for a while. And Cayman was so interested in that because he wanted to go with her. Liena was confused. Why was he suddenly saying these things? Cayman reminded her that he had come here to find less ego in her. But that wasn't really the main reason. Cayman is worried about Liena. What if she goes through the pain alone like yesterday, or cries because she's alone? She needs someone to wake her up from her nightmares and take care of her. So Cayman wanted to be with her. Liena didn't even know he thought so much of her, and it was a little touching. But she couldn't accept that kind of help from a friend, so she refused. But Cayman insisted. They were not empty words. If she hadn't decided where to go yet, he'd even offered to go to his house. He got down on one knee and decided to propose, only this time properly. Lady Liena, will you become my wife? It took Liena no time to realize why the fact that she was packing up her things, about to leave Poston, had spilled over into a marriage proposal. Louis told the landlady that the man was honest and had rushed here last night without a second thought to take care of her. But even if his feelings are genuine, it could plunge him into danger around Liena because she hasn't told him anything about her personality and situation yet. So it's the right thing to say no. When she tried to say no to him, it was very difficult because he was so handsome and she liked him. But he's not only handsome, he has good manners. Of course, he helps her when she is in trouble and understands her. He is the perfect kind of husband she dreamed of. But she must answer him and go away, though it is very unfair. Before refusing, she decided to admit to him that she was one of the 5 daughters of Duke Pond. But Cayman wasn't surprised at all. He would only be surprised when he heard her story to the end, and he thought she was packing to return to her family. Liena explains that she isn't, and her father is here to take her away. So she's trying to avoid him, but for a while that's the only option. Then she thought that maybe there was no need to go far away. After all, as long as her father couldn't find her, everything would be fine. She would be able to create a hiding place in Postina, such as an ice cave. Instead of leaving, she should find a place to hide. Thanks to Cayman, her thoughts became clearer, so she wanted to go out for a while and walk around the area. But as she was opening the door, Cayman came very close. He stopped her. She still hadn't responded to his confession. It was very difficult for Liena in this position to think because she had a flirting machine in front of her. Cayman was very different now from their first meeting. Liena tried to explain that she needed to find shelter first, but he suggested she didn't waste time on that because he would be there for her, even though her father was a duke. Liena was really touched. After all, she thought that Cayman, not having such a high status like her father, wouldn't be able to do anything if the duke came here. But even still, Cayman maintained that no matter what happened, he would protect her. So even now, He wanted her to just focus and respond to his confession and offered a date with the premise of marriage. A while ago, Cayman had suddenly contacted his sister and startled her. Now they had to quickly deal with today's work stuff. But the sister noticed that for some reason her brother was now very quiet and sighing heavily, as if something had happened. The work-obsessed workaholic became so strange after his trip to Poston. My sister thought I should ask around. She was going to listen to him and make him work for his business, but she hadn't expected the situation to be this serious. Cayman said with such an embarrassed face that he found a woman he wanted to marry. The sister was shocked. She asked several times if he was sure he was talking about a real human woman and not a cat. No matter how many young ladies tried to get his attention, Cayman had always shown interest only in cats and no interest at all in others. But now he was suddenly talking about marrying a real woman. In any case, as for the lady of the Duchy of Pond, Sister was already prepared to look for details about breaking her engagement, but it would be good to check two more things. Cayman wanted to erase Duke Pond's family from this world, but if that wasn't possible, he wanted to incorporate Poston into Imperial territory. It was too harsh a statement, and the sister, of course, tried to calm Cayman down. She certainly understood that all was fair with this woman, but to remove the Duke and annex territories was too much. And then she wondered about the original reason he'd gone to Poston in the first place. The most important thing was the Sword of Ego. In all this time, the Emperor hadn't said a word about the sword, but now he reassured his sister. Now there was another problem. Would this girl agree to marry? Few people can agree to marry the Emperor so quickly. It's only a very brave lady. And Cayman remembered that Liena didn't know he was the Emperor yet. Now Liena was thinking back to Cayman's confession. That day had been like a dream. She distinctly remembered the look on his face at that moment. It was clear that he really liked her, and it wasn't because of Louis. Cayman thought that the reason she was still hesitant to answer was because she couldn't forget her ex-fiancé, so he wanted to wring that guy's neck. Liena couldn't really give an answer because it was all too sudden and she didn't know much about Cayman. Besides, there were problems to be solved, but her heart told her that she had feelings too, so she agreed to go out with him. Cayman became her boyfriend from now on. He promised to protect her. It had been one day since then. Liena was visiting her grandmother, and they were discussing plants, but Liena wasn't listening at all. She kept thinking about her own things. Grandma noticed something wrong right away, because Liena's eyes usually light up when she talks about her farming, so Grandma started to worry. Only she didn't know that the reason for all of this was her grandson. Liena didn't even know where to begin her explanation. She said that her father had recently come to see her because the prince is looking for her for some unknown reason, but he's probably trying to get support from the nobles by taking her back, or wants her to take over the princess business. Grandmother couldn't leave it as it was, and she herself wanted to step in and stop it with her power. How dare this duke even dare to come here in secret from her? But Liena didn't want to bother her grandmother, and asked her to just leave it alone. For a moment she thought of leaving Poston, and then her grandmother began to dissuade her. She didn't want to brag, of course, but there was nowhere else besides Poston that was so hospitable to foreigners, and anywhere else the lord of the manor would have taken away her sweet potatoes for free. This world is a very cruel place, and anywhere else Liena would have been cheated. Her grandmother would have continued to talk her out of it, but Liena finally blurted out that the guy had said it would be best to stay here and not leave. Grandma was shocked that Liena had a boyfriend so suddenly, and of course wondered who it was. Could it be someone she knew? At that moment, Cayman walked into the room. He brought the desserts and told his grandmother that it had happened, and now he was Liena's boyfriend. For just a couple seconds, Grandma was shocked, but she quickly accepted the news, for she had secretly wanted this for a long time. So she even suggested that they start with the wedding and do the ceremony next week. And she also suggested that they should have 3 children and not relax at all. Liena reminded her that they had only started dating yesterday. Grandma was just too excited. She asked them when they started having feelings for each other, and Cayman suddenly started to feel shy about answering that question. Yesterday he flirted so much with Liena, and today he was embarrassed in front of his grandmother. Liena decided to answer instead. She said that they had just eaten together many times and had become involuntarily attached to each other. Grandmother looked at the two of them fondly. She asked, "What is Liena going to do next if her father comes after her?" Liena had already decided that she could hide in an ice cave, but her grandmother couldn't let her live like that. She suggested using the castle. It didn't matter how much of a scoundrel her father was. He simply wouldn't be able to enter another nobleman's estate without permission. Probably won't even think that this is where Liana is hiding. It was indeed a good offer, but Liana didn't want to bother her grandmother and refused. However, Grandma would only be happy if Liana stayed here. Liana realized now that she was even glad she had been left at Poston, because she had been able to meet such a good grandmother and her equally good grandson, who remained close to her. Grandma can be a good person to Liana because she is a good person too. Quickly, they decided to assign her a room right next to Cayman's room. He justified it by saying that if something happened, he had to get to Liana the fastest. It was very disconcerting. Liana went to the butler to pick a room. Left alone, Grandmother immediately became very serious and turned to the Emperor. She really had no idea what he was thinking. Cayman didn't understand why she was having such a reaction. Was it because of Liana's status? But Grandmother isn't old and stupid enough to get angry over such things. She was actually very worried because Liana still doesn't realize that Cayman is an emperor. How long is he going to hide his true identity? This isn't just some ordinary title after all, it's pretty serious. What if Liana takes offense when she finds out the truth that has been kept from her? Cayman was now starting to worry about it too. He wasn't going to hide it on purpose. He was just too scared to tell Liana about it. He was afraid that she would choose the farm and leave the emperor. It's unlikely that Liana will give up farming and choose the emperor. Even though she likes him, Liana is happy in Postina. Cayman still has to tell her the truth. A relationship built on illusions, but already, no matter how beautiful it may seem, is just an illusion. Grandmother said this because she herself had such an experience when she met her future husband. He told her how much he loved her and wanted to be happy together. But after a time, he had many mistresses. And when his wife expressed dissatisfaction, he said that the emperor would not live only for her sake, and she should be content to wear the crown of empress. Still, Grandma does consider Cayman her dear grandson and Liana her dear friend. Grandmother hopes that they can live happily ever after, without the pain she herself has experienced. The story of her grandmother's unhappy marriage was known even within the royal family. She was recognized for her swordsmanship, and perhaps she would be happier now if she had not come to the empire and become the emperor's wife. Cayman wasn't going to let Liana give up her desires for the throne. After all, that wasn't the path to happiness for either of them. Protecting Liana and her farm was exactly how Cayman wanted to be happy together. Cayman had jokingly said something to his sister at first, but the more he thought about it, the clearer it became to him that it was the only and good choice to include Poston as part of the imperial territories, since it was a city not far from the border and it shouldn't cause any difficulty. Cayman hoped that if he did this, Liana would understand him, even if she recognized his true identity. This was the first time Cayman felt fear that others might not accept him. But as he was walking towards his room, he heard Liana's joyful voice, and then all his worries vanished. Liana was happy with her new room, which was so both spacious and beautiful, and the bed was big and soft. She kept puzzling over what to do, but in the end it was very simple. Thanks to Cayman and Grandma, she can stay in the safest place possible. Her boyfriend is so cool, promising to protect her from the Duke. But it was still a little strange. Why hadn't he even blinked an eye when he found out that Liana was the Duke's daughter? More and more she wondered, who was Cayman, and could it be that his status was high? But Liana had never seen him while she was in the Duchy of Pond. Cayman met her in her room to see if she was satisfied with the story. She liked everything, so she was very happy, and they decided to take a little walk together. Now she was feeling awkward and nervous for no reason, probably because she was starting to accept him as a boyfriend. It wasn't the first time they'd been alone together, but right now, even when they met eyes, Liana blushed and felt awkward. Her heart felt like it was freezing. Apparently that's what a date felt like. In the past, when Liana had met her fiancé, it had taken no more than 2 minutes of time. He said he was constantly busy and didn't want to just talk to his fiancé because he liked wasting time with other girls. Liana felt it getting heavier and heavier on her heart, but she couldn't cross the prince, and she had to keep her family calls and behave herself to be a princess, always smiling brightly no matter what. To live being loved is the greatest happiness. But there was no love between her and David. Cayman asked if he could take Liana's hand, and there was sincerity in all his words and actions. Liana felt completely different, not like she did with David. That's how it should be, a kind and warm hand. Liana couldn't hold back her emotions and cried. She thought she couldn't love anyone else. But now she realized that she really loved Cayman as much as he loved her. She loved holding hands with him. He was already deep in her heart. Cayman said there was a lot he hadn't had time to tell her and couldn't tell her now, but he didn't want to disappoint her, so he asked her to just wait a little longer. Liena had faith in him and didn't feel threatened. Of course, she would wait until he was ready to tell her everything. The day had gone very well, and when evening came, Liena was very tired. But because of the unusual surroundings in such a large room, she doubted she would be able to sleep. Liena had already forgotten how she always slept in a room like this, in the Duke's mansion. But she also had an uneasy feeling from the beginning, as if she had forgotten something. She had forgotten about Louis, whom she had left at home, and now he flew to her himself, full of rage because she had said she would be back soon. But she had been gone all day and apparently wasn't coming back. He had been following her all day, and it had been very cruel. Liena apologized and explained that they would be staying in the castle of the city for a while, but she would tell him the details tomorrow. Still, the tiredness of his memory was hers, and she fell asleep very quickly. The morning sunlight shone cooler, illuminating the room, and Liena woke up. Opening her eyes, she saw someone in front of her. There was some beautiful girl lying in front of her, but was that possible? Liena was sure it was a dream, so she just rolled over to the other side. Suddenly, however, she heard a voice. This girl made her wake up sooner. She was sure that as soon as Liena woke up and saw someone in front of her, she would say hello, but she decided to continue sleeping. And for that, she got minus 20 points. Liena all the more began to realize that this wasn't a dream and that something strange was going on. Who was this girl, and what was she doing in the room right on the bed? They met. This girl's name was Susan, and she was pleased to meet Liena. But this whole situation was very strange and awkward. Moreover, Liena didn't understand where Louis had gone again. He's usually around at times like this, and is immediately ready to chop the necks off suspicious people everywhere. Liena thought that maybe the powers of the mistress of this room. But right now, this room didn't belong to her, because her grandmother had allocated the place to Liena. Susan knew all of this. She was here to see Liena. What the hell is going on here? Eventually, the situation became more and more unclear. Liena left the room because it was awkward, but Susan followed her. She finally asked, "Where is Liena going?" She said she just wanted to go for a walk. Susan gave her a plus. These walks are good, and movement is good. Liena still didn't understand what was going on, but she didn't seem to be a suspicious person, because all the servants greeted her without hesitation. Susan started asking if Liena liked the postin, and when she got a positive answer, she began to lie down and say that everything was much better in the Empire. Liena didn't understand why it was about the Empire, and then Susan asked what she thought of the Emperor. Liena was increasingly unable to make sense of these questions. Maybe rumors of the harvest had reached the Empire and Liena could expand her business? In that case, it would even be a good thing. Liena continued walking, and suddenly came across some raspberry bushes that were already ripe. Liena suggested that this girl give it a try. Susan was a little surprised. Is it possible not to wash berries? The air here is clean, so you don't have to wash them. The raspberries didn't even taste sour. Liena said that you could make raspberries out of it, and then the raspberries would be sour. Susan asked who was going to make the jam in the first place. Liena, of course, said she makes it herself, especially in this village. Susan had the same reaction as Cayman had earlier. They both couldn't get it into their heads how they could cook something themselves. Liena only laughed and asked the girl to help pick raspberries to make a refreshing raspberry iced tea, since it was very hot today. Cayman, meanwhile, was practicing on the court, and Louis was secretly watching him. He had heard that Cayman was the grandson of a stupid former emperor, but this guy seems pretty good. Louis felt a tremendous power, especially those confident eyes. Cayman reminded Louis very much of his first master, to me very much alike indeed. He was the strongest, and he needed the strongest sword like Louis. Only back then it didn't have its own name, it was just called the Sword of Ego. The lad with a confident look claimed that to defeat the dragon, and so the sword was enchanted and accepted him as its first master. This young man later became a great hero and emperor of a huge empire. The first emperor of the Martial Empire, Louis Martial, was very cool indeed. But as his status grew, the sword increasingly became a mere showpiece. Countless emperors treated it as a ceremonial ball. Despite this, Louis endured, sensing the presence of the first owner among all the following emperors. But that patience ended with the previous emperor, who was a worthless fool and didn't even know Louis existed. The empress left the empire after the divorce, and Louis left quietly, out of sight of anyone. But who would have thought he would meet this descendant again in distant Postina? If Louis had known to use that guy's name, then he showed unnecessary pride. and should have just asked to think of a name while the first emperor was still alive. Cayman had noticed the presence of the sword a long time ago, and he said that if Louis wanted to say something, let him say it instead of peeking. Louis got embarrassed and said he was just checking to see if he was doing the right thing, and it was awful in general. Cayman didn't hear what the sword was saying and thought he wanted to talk about Liena. Cayman and said he was serious about her, and of course he was originally ego month for her, but now it's different, and he's grown to respect Louis's will to serve Liena. Louis lingered as long as he could. Why is this guy so cute? And then Cayman thought that maybe it was because Louis wanted to be waved at. Louis and especially denied it strongly, but when Cayman picked up the sword, Louis felt joy, and he thought he might let Cayman use it at least once. Louis called it a test, whether this guy was a suitable partner for the host. Cayman moved very quickly and easily. Louis was almost fascinated. Why is this guy so outstanding? Louis actually felt good, but he had conflicting feelings, and then he felt the master beside him. Louis immediately flew to his mistress, started crying, calling himself a bad sword. It all happened so suddenly that the raspberries she had been picking so diligently just crumbled. Or rather, it would have fallen apart if Susan, who has a very fast reaction time, hadn't been there to catch the raspberries. Cayman was surprised to see his sister here. He asked why she was here. This is the second Princess Susan Marshall. She's Cayman's younger sister, and Liena only found that out now. Susan could have just said she came to see who would become a daughter-in-law, but instead she barged into a sleeping man's room and then stalked everywhere. Then they went into the kitchen together to make tea. Susan even helped him, but she also watched carefully as the sword of ego didn't even move away from Liena. A short while later, they made several servings of raspberry iced tea. Liena immediately blushed when she saw Cayman, or rather her boyfriend, who had just finished his workout and looked like he would try to seduce her with his wet look. Liena was embarrassed, especially with his sister around. Liena quietly told Cayman to go dry his hair so he wouldn't catch a cold. He was just in a hurry because he didn't want to keep her waiting. Susan was surprised that the two were already socializing without formality, and then Grandma came in. They all sit at the table together to drink this refreshing beverage, and were surprised that Susan even helped. Susan watched everything carefully and noticed that the atmosphere between her brother and grandmother was different from usual. Even if Cayman and this girl are dating, he's still an emperor. But why is he using such a friendly tone? Susan suddenly realized that maybe this girl didn't yet know about who Cayman really was. Judging by the reactions of her brother and grandmother, Susan realized without answers that it was true. Just as she started to berate them, about to immediately reveal everything as it was, Cayman managed to stop her and even change the topic of conversation. They ended up having a real fight over not having differing opinions and went into another room to talk. Liena didn't even know Cayman had a younger sister, and her grandmother told her that he actually even had two younger twin sisters. Cayman hadn't been home for a long time, so one of them decided to come and check on him. Liena realized that Cayman was trying to hide his sister-in-law's existence, meaning that Liena was already starting to feel like a daughter-in-law. A few days ago at the Imperial Palace, the sisters were discussing the fact that her brother was taking too long to return. Susan was very unhappy about it because she wanted to go on vacation to the south of the country, but she couldn't leave the capital. Then Reese said that her brother had a bride in Postina. Susan was surprised. So how did a man who only loved cats suddenly want to marry a real woman? And what about the sword of ego he was after? The first sister, Reese, actually felt sorry for Cayman because it was like unrequited love. It's not like he can take the bride with him. And Susan decided that she should personally bring her brother and the bride candidate here. Reese said she shouldn't do that and ruin someone else's love, but Susan just quit her job because she felt it was unfair that her brother could vacation and she couldn't. And so she ran away without even finishing listening to her sister. Now Susan was trying to figure out why her brother had not told his girlfriend about being the emperor, for something of an ego follows this woman like a servant. How was it possible to leave things as they were? Reese had already revealed that the emperor was going to marry this woman, but then how could one hide their identity? Is it really to gain the sword of ego? Cayman would probably do that, but right now he considers him an enemy without love. That's not something he can do. At first he thought that revealing his identity would put him at a disadvantage, and Liena could use blackmail. But the more they talked and spent time together, the better they got along. And the more Cayman realized he needed to keep things private. And now he understood the reason Louis had chosen Liena as his mistress. Cayman had already decided that he wanted to protect Liena and Louis' desire to follow her. In the end, it was his fear of not seeing hatred from this woman that kept him from telling the truth. The Sword of Ego symbolizes the legitimacy of the Emperor, and Cayman definitely understands its importance. But Susan doesn't understand why her brother acts this way. Why does he act as if he and Louis have become friends? Right now, the sisters' words no longer solved anything. After all, thanks to the marriage, the Emperor will be able to jointly wield the sword, so that part has already been resolved. Sister asked when the Emperor is going to return to the Empire. Even if Grandma doesn't live on the train, it's still a different country. And then she learned the shocking news. The Emperor was thinking of incorporating Poston into the Empire so that he wouldn't have to return to the capital, but rather do business right here as he does now. Susan didn't know anything about it because all the countries told. But incorporating this place into the Empire would be easy. And with the communication tunnel and teleportation zone remote, working a definite possibility. Anyway, my brother said that Susan realized what a good place this was when she spent some more time here. However, we need to keep his identity a secret until everything is ready. Susan was very angry. She had come all this way to hear this? Her brother was a real fool, all because of this woman. This year in Leanna's destiny is destined to raise children, but she doesn't understand why she continues to surround herself with such strange people. Susan continued to pursue her and cried while doing so. And Louis was crying too, calling herself a bad sword. Leanna asked, "Did they really have a fight with Cayman?" But Susan didn't want to talk. Leanna was just strolling around the grounds. She had rarely been near the glass greenhouse, but this time she came to look after the place. Apparently not cared for at all. It was very dirty. Leanna once suggested a picnic, but her grandmother would look on angrily. Apparently there are bad memories behind the place. Leanna decided to clean the place up and would ask to turn into a pair of scissors. Susan didn't understand why Leanna was doing these grandfatherly gardener's chores. But even after she said that, Leanna still continued. Susan was in a bad mood already, and for her brother, Leanna was still doing this kind of thing. Susan didn't understand how there could even be a person who didn't know that she was going to become an empress. Susan said again that a hostess shouldn't be doing this sort of thing, and it was better for Leanna to stop. Leanna didn't understand why Susan was acting like this, so instead of this useless request, she advised her to go and make up with her brother. It is natural for a person to work to live a well-fed life, and even if a person is an owner, on the contrary, he should take the initiative. If the master rests, the workers will not work properly. To make others work, the master must try even harder. Susan remembered that her brother had always been a workaholic. He even put off meals to work. He must have worked hard for the people. Susan finally realized why they had fallen in love with each other. And then she began to talk about how her older brother had suffered a lot since he was a child, and how Grandpa was very strict and scary. Grandpa especially didn't like Reese and Susan, so he scolded them for even the most insignificant things, and Kaminu was always scolded because he was defensive. Cayman, though, sometimes grumbling and a lot of stubbornness when Susan asked to learn to ride, or when she insisted on being given wooden swords. But the brothers never stopped. He was always supportive of her endeavors that didn't work out. Because of this older brother, Susan seems to have become sensitive without even realizing it. It was a lot like Cayman. He never once asked Leanna why she was farming. He just supports all the successes, and he must be happy to have such a good sister. When Leanna was kicked out of her home, no one helped her, not even her sisters. Now she realizes that she was a truly pathetic person. She thought this world was a place to move through alone, but when Cayman said he would protect her, she was very surprised. Meeting him was a stroke of luck, so Leanna wants to be that kind of person for Cayman as well. Susan began to understand this girl better, and even asked her to take care of her older brother. And if times get tough, she can feel free to ask for help, and now they are a family. Leanna and Susan felt a great closeness and shook hands. But suddenly they heard some shouting. Someone was trying to break into the area with weapons. The servants immediately asked the lady to stay in the greenhouse for a while, because uninvited guests are trying to invade this castle, and with weapons. Grandma didn't expect that one to still dare to do that and try to take Leanna away by force. That's very brazen. The invasion of the kingdom's soldiers was tantamount to a declaration of war, and it was very dangerous indeed. Cayman was going to deal with it himself, but his grandmother said it was Poston, and the emperor of another country can't interfere. Furthermore, he is now Leanna's lover and can act on emotions, which could cause an accident, so Grandma couldn't let that happen. She can still protect these people, so she's getting it all out herself. Cayman looked in disgust at the man who had abandoned his daughter, deeming her useless, and now came back to forcibly take her and use her. Even if Leanna forgives her father, Cayman certainly can't. My Lady Aurelian made the Duke into her home and even talked to him respectfully. After all, he was a duke, and she was just a lord from some village, even though she used to be an empress. The Duke made a few sarcastic jokes before starting a serious conversation, and then said that he had come to express his gratitude for her taking care of his daughter for several years. Aurelian said that Liena is a very intelligent and diligent child. The whole poet loves her, and she hasn't asked anyone for help. But the most important thing is that Liena has renounced the pawn surname, so the Duke has nothing to worry about anymore. The Duke exploded that this woman dared to contradict him, but still, he had come to get his daughter and needed to know where she was now. Aurelian said that the Duke was a little late, and just recently Liena said she wanted to go on a trip, so she was issued a pass. But the Duke had checked the information beforehand, and there was no man who had come from Poston. He was sure she wouldn't have traveled to a distant land, because she wouldn't have had the determination to go farther than the place where she was born. The Duke said bluntly that at length the prince missed Liena, and at last the woman who pretended to be a saint revealed her true nature. The Duke believed that even if Liena didn't want to be the crown princess, it was his responsibility as parents to guide the child to a happy path. Aurelian also followed her heart and became a humble country lord. But although she got the divorce she wanted, it wasn't all good. She could no longer live with her children and grandchildren, and she had to endure the humiliating looks of those who recognized her position. But at least to say, "I persuade my children for their happiness" is a good feeling. Except, did Liena look unhappy when the Duke visited her recently? Liena looks very happy and content with her current life. Just because a person lives the life they want doesn't mean that all outcomes will be happy. At least there would be no regrets, and real parents teach their children to live that way. So she advised the Duke to just leave Liena alone. So that's what the parental role is all about, the child's involvement. But the Duke was sure that all this was nonsense, and one cannot live happily under such conditions, especially the Duke's daughter, who had lived in luxury since childhood. And anyway, even if the child is unhappy, it doesn't really matter considering she became the daughter of a Duke. She should listen to what her parents say whether she wants to or not. But devoting herself to her family is a child's duty. This was the first time Liena had been in this greenhouse, and she would have liked to see everything, but her mind was on something else. Her father had come here with a gun, a real declaration of war. Knowing his temper, it was unlikely that he would leave obediently. Liena was afraid that if she didn't intervene, her father would attack Poston, then it would all be over. Life, the village, her grandmother, the lord, and including Cayman. Louis had done nothing but cry until that moment, but now he proudly declared that he would defend his master. Liena, thanks to his words, felt a little lighter, so she decided to go and talk to her grandmother. But it turns out that the soldiers brought by the Duke had already snuck into the greenhouse, and one of them grabbed Liena by the arm. The soldier said that the Duke knew she would hide here, and no one believed that a young lady who had never left home would go on long journeys. Susan immediately rushed to the rescue. She said to the soldier, "Take your hands away, for I will consider his actions as disobedience to Lord Postina." Only the soldier was too confident and said that Lord Postina wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Susan was starting to get stronger and stronger, and Liena realized that she had to stop this soldier so nothing bad could happen to them. She said that by invading someone else's territory, they were declaring war. Only the soldier was very fond of this invasion, and he believed that Poston, who had hidden the young lady, was the real culprit. The soldier said that he was doing all this for Lady Liena's sake. After all, she had an opportunity to become the highest-ranking woman in the country. You can't refuse something like that. She was born into wealth and grew up enjoying its fruits, so she should repay the favor. And in fact, she had harmed the family by taking responsibility for the broken engagement and being banished from the family. According to her father, it was her own fault that she had been cast out of the family. Her father and brothers had done nothing but watch her misfortune. There's no way a simple soldier could think of such words alone. It means that the whole story's a sellout. The soldier completely forgot about statuses and said that Liena couldn't even seduce one man. She's a mediocrity. Louis really didn't like it. Kill him. The host is very talented among the decades and even centuries he has lived. She is the most remarkable host who recognized the value of the sword of self-love. Louis didn't want the master to continue listening to this slander, and one must at least take some action. One must just pick up the sword and fight together. Liena's confidence sprang up. Why should she retreat when she had done nothing wrong? Hearing such words and doing nothing was not in her character, so she drew her sword and attacked this soldier. It was the first time she'd ever used a sword, but for some reason she was doing great, as if she was very talented at it. Even the soldier was surprised to think that this lady had learned fencing because he had a hard time fending off her blows. Lewis said it's because when he's around, anyone can become the best swordsman in the world. That's Louis' strength. He won't leave alone those who torment the master. Liena moved in a very professional manner, swinging her sword but without exerting too much effort. She was even able to chop that soldier's sword in half, and the soldier didn't know what to do anymore. In the end, he got scared and just ran away. Liena was grateful, and he's so amazing all this time hiding his amazing abilities. Liena was very pleased that Louis had stood up for her, and although she was his mistress, she had done nothing for him but scold him. Louis loved Liena very much, and she didn't scold him. Even now she only praises him, and all his other previous users thought they were strong because of their own strength. Louis prefers a master who recognizes his strength. Still, he wouldn't want to be used as a pair of scissors to cut the ends of cucumbers. But scissors as sharp as Louis' are nowhere to be found. Susan stood back during this time, and she was really surprised. Her sister-in-law turned out to be so cool and was able to hack the sword in half. Susan was thrilled and would like to see this flawless skill at least one more time. This behavior was very unexpected. Liena was also suddenly promoted to the status of daughter-in-law. Liena, of course, said it wasn't her skills but Louis' strength, but Susan loved it anyway, since her sister-in-law is the ball owner of Lube herself. Cayman finally came to the greenhouse. Grandmother had a few more words to report to them that soldiers had infiltrated the castle earlier, but thankfully, everything was safe here. Susan proudly told how her sister-in-law had defeated the soldiers who came here. Liena was proud too, as she just held Louis and he did it all by himself. It's a very clever sword. Cayman was shocked. He didn't know that the sword of ego could fight on its own, and to him, a kiss to manage was the work of a master. But Louis had long boasted that all the great feats of the previous masters were his merit. Apparently, he wasn't lying after all. Cayman about it, so all the rivers of the previous emperors were not to their credit, but all thanks to the sword. Grandma was standing somewhere off to the side. She was looking at an agave leaf that had been cut, all because of a soldier who had ruined everything. This was the first time Liena had seen agave in this greenhouse, but they say that the syrup made from it is sweet and delicious and can be used to make fiber, syrup, and even alcohol. But Grandma looked downcast because that agave plant is the only thing she took with her after her divorce. When the Duke was leaving, he said that next time it would end with more than just words. He shouldn't have thrown around words. If he wanted a war, the Lord would give him a war. It was his fault with me that his soldiers had infiltrated the manor. Grandmother also ordered the butler to bring her armor and sword. She was going to prepare for war right now. When Aurelian was young, a prince showed her this agave plant for the country. This plant is essential, but because of the ancestral civil war, everything was burned and the agave was on the verge of extinction. Then Aurelian, and basically the decision to believe on treat this birth and together raise it, he would be the fourth prince with a son far from the throne. But thanks to Aurelian's significant contribution in the Battle of the Heirs, I could not rise to the position of emperor. She knew he lacked a lot, but deep down she loved him and wanted to be with him. She had come all the way to this distant foreign land, believing in the vow to be happy together. But the love he spoke of was in vain. He cheated on her, but he also thought it was her fault, as she had no charm from the start and no one would like such a cruel woman. He betrayed her trust and then blamed her. Aurelian rejected such a lowly man without question and decided to return home. Then the emperor thought she had gone mad, for she was the empress, and how could she refuse such a position? But Aurelian had made her decision and wasn't going to change it when the emperor realized it. He tried to apologize and keep her by his side, saying it was his own fault and he couldn't live without her. But his wife never came back to him. He's too bold. Once upon a time, she was proud of him. As part of that pride, she took one pot of agave with her. Grandma said Liena had to leave, but she didn't want to leave because it was her problem too. However, when the soldiers broke the agave, it became Aurelian's problem too. But grandmother told her grandchildren to stay out of it and leave. Liena will do something about it later, but Cayman suggested just leaving until grandma calms down. Moreover, though it's hard to believe, grandmother is incredibly strong, and right now it's hard to tell who's really in danger here. Susan also started talking about how strong grandmother was. She once broke a sword with her bare hands. Even Louis was aware of how strong she was. Aurelian is a walking natural disaster, although her body doesn't show it. When Susan found out the whole story of why the Duke was coming here, she just wanted to take a sword and send the Duke to hell. She wanted to hit even the Crown Prince who abandoned Liena right now, and that thieving nanny who went unpunished. Even though the Duke's soldier had damaged the agave, it was all a consequence of Liena's actions, so she wanted to solve the problem. Now the situation is on the brink of war, but somehow the brother and sister are talking about love. Why are they so calm? Liena thought the only way out was for Louis and herself to subdue her father. Liena wanted to get rid of the Duke, but at the same time, not hurt Poston. She absolutely does not want to go back and is worried because she wants to be with Cayman. Those words soothed his soul and he told Liena to just relax and trust him. And it was worth waiting a little while and everything would be solved because Cayman already had something in mind. They then decided to take a walk together, and Liena asked the guy, "He's not thinking about fighting personally, is he? If it comes to the point where the Crown Prince steps in for the Duke, it will be very difficult. Cayman wants to marry Liena, so he should be able to easily deal with her problems, and he's very happy that she supports him and doesn't want to go back to the kingdom. But even if she said she'd come back, she'd still be there for him." Cayman motioned for the rooms to disperse and went first to the front. Liena felt that the atmosphere in the air was eerie. Maybe it's just her imagination, but Louis is already used to it. He can't let his guard down when someone from the Marshall family is around. There's definitely madness flowing in his blood. In the palace of the Crown Prince, Kang Sina came to him again and saw a familiar situation. The prince drank again, fell asleep. Even though she told him it was bad for his body, he keeps getting mad at her and they fight. It would be nice if he was always calm, but the way he was before, pure and innocent, was a real lie. He just fooled Sena. Suddenly I noticed a picture between some papers. She decided to look, and at first this portrait seemed familiar. And after a little while she remembered that it was the Duke of Pon's daughter. She is the villain of the novel. Thanks to her knowledge of the original story, Kang Sena was able to break the engagement quickly so that the villain didn't have time to do anything, and managed to defeat her beforehand without any repercussions. But now she didn't understand why he was so set in his ways. There's this portrait lying there. Does he really miss this woman? Liena hadn't even reappeared, so why? And then the girl wondered, what if it wasn't written in the original, but David kept missing Liena? She tensed up at first, but then decided it didn't make sense, and there was no way that could happen. David started to move a little in his sleep, causing a few more papers to fall off the desk. Sena happened to notice what was written there and learned that the prince wanted to announce that the prophecy had been misinterpreted. The maiden who descended from heaven will bring prosperity and abundance to this country. In the original work, the principal and the Holy Virgin appear in each other and naturally come to a happy ending. But the most decisive reasons for their within became prophecy. But now they have decided to announce that the prophecy is wrong. It means that they must part. Next was a letter from Duke Pond, saying that Liena was now living in a small territory called Poston, but he would soon bring her here. Sena realized that it's all very different from the original, and even though she knows the original, prevented the villainess in advance, the villainess is still a villain. She's so evil that she was able to change the original, and apparently she's going to come back soon and start flirting with the prince, even though he already has a wife. Sena has decided to meet this vixen before David does, so she will be traveling to Poston soon. Evening had come. Liena had calmed down, but needed to hurry to stop her grandmother. If a territorial war broke out, plans would go awry in many ways, of course. And even if grandmother were to stand idly by, it would be impossible to lose to the Duke. Cayman's grandfather kept telling him that no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't be able to become an emperor that everyone would recognize, and he was just wasting his time. But unlike him, Cayman was the recognized heir to the throne, so Grandpa was especially harsh. It was to him, and he often bragged about it, but now it turns out that Grandpa's ball art was thanks to the Sword of Ego. Cayman made various efforts to gain his recognition, but Grandpa was a cowardly and ugly man to the very end. Nevertheless, Cayman is grateful for one thing. Thanks to him, the Sword of Ego chose Liena, and Cayman himself was able to meet her in Postina. Cayman came to his grandmother. She was already beside her armor and sword, serious. He asked if grandmother was okay, worried that she couldn't get up because of the sounds. She would fall. Obviously, this was his way of trying to stop her in some way. Cayman said that Duke was Liena's father, and even if they were broken up, he was still family, and she wouldn't want to hurt him. But grandmother was in earnest, for her feelings were hurt by money too. The Duke hurt her head, which meant a lot. Grandmother thought her heart was growing. Perhaps it's silly for his grandmother to hold on to the past, but Cayman understood her and he probably inherited his grandmother's inability to let go of what's in her heart. In that, they are alike. He finally told her that he was now researching how to incorporate Poston into the empire, so he asked his grandmother to stop the territorial war, at least for his sake. She was shocked. If the emperor took the kingdom's lands, it was obvious that relations with the kingdom would deteriorate, and Poston wasn't even in a geographically important location. But Poston belongs to his grandmother, so Cayman decided to get only her permission. Recognizing a lord's autonomy is an unspoken rule of world politics, regardless of country. The grandmother thought it was very strong, but the grandson explained that it was not a simple matter, and there was a reason for it all. Baron and Reese feel that a form of donation would be best, but donating the land to a grandson who is in no way connected to the lands would cause resentment. So if the grandmother agrees, she can gift this land to Cayman and Leanna's child, since she is a citizen of the same country. Grandma didn't mind, but how could they pull it off if they weren't even married yet? The accent will take longer, because they're not married yet. So Cayman has until then proposed to his grandmother to just live quietly as Lord Pastina, which will become imperial territory. Reese will send the marriage proposal to the royal palace right now. If the lord demanded incorporation for such reasons, the kingdom wouldn't be able to challenge it. The grandmother was surprised that her grandson had thought it through so well, and he must have inherited that ambition from her after all. Only first, Leanna must be persuaded to travel to the empire for the marriage, a choice Cayman decided to leave entirely to her, acting as she wished. It would be strange for her to have the empress of the nation in such a backwater, and not in the capital. Cayman came to this conclusion while pondering after his last conversation with his grandmother. How could everyone be happy without someone else's sacrifice? Grandmother realized that you can't impose the old rules and expect Leanna to become an empress and live up to the standards of the past. Even if her love was great, such an approach would do no good. Grandmother realized that there was no need to start a war, especially if Leanna took up farming. In addition, if Leanna became empress, she would definitely be able to spread agave cultivation throughout the empire. The grandmother realized that attachment to the past was not foolishness, but she already has children in her life and now grandchildren. The old era is gone, and her children are continuing the path, even if it is not in keeping with tradition. Grandmother was proud that her family continued to rule the country, but if the Duke started making trouble again, she wouldn't sit idly by. The Duke had come to see Leanna's accomplishments, her vast fields and garden. The Duke didn't like that Leanna was able to make such progress. He thought he should have taught her something important to maintain a good position in society, not farming. Even the nanny didn't believe Leanna could survive on her own. But when she tried to talk to her, Leanna got angry and chased her away. Everyone started saying that Leanna had some special influence, and it couldn't help but attract attention. The Duke was thinking how he could quickly change his daughter's mind, for there was not much time left. He decided that if Leanna went to the palace, he would help her get rid of her regrets and support her along the way. During the night, Leanna woke up to a loud scream and heard that a fire had started on her farm. Cayman immediately rushed into her room to wake her up and warn her of the fire. Leanna immediately gathered herself and ran to her field, even seeing from afar how huge the fire was. She didn't understand how it could have started or what had been saved. Leanna was willing to go straight into the fire to find out what happened. The servants tried to stop her, but she pushed them away. This farm was her life, her labor. She built it from the ground up. Cayman tried to calm her down, telling her that it was too dangerous and she needed to think of the people, not just the field. Leanna realized that the field could not be helped, but people could be hurt. She had to put out the fire before it engulfed the village. All the residents started carrying water from the well, and soon they were able to put out the fire. Everyone was exhausted, but the field was saved. The watermelon field was lost, but the vineyard remained safe. Leanna stood empty-eyed, watching the destruction. Cayman noticed her condition and approached her, saying that it was normal to cry at times like this. He said it was okay, but Leanna couldn't even shed a tear. Suddenly, someone reported seeing a man in strange clothing pouring oil on the field and setting it on fire. It is now clear that the fire was arson and not a random natural disaster. Leanna realized that it was her father who had set fire to her field. She could not cry, for there was only anger in her soul. Leanna decided she wasn't going to take it anymore. She wanted an apology from her father, despite anyone's attempts to stop her. Cayman promised to catch the culprit and make him kneel before Leanna to apologize. After that, he had an important conversation with her. The next morning, Cayman contacted his sister and informed her of the engagement. as well as Poston's integration into the Empire. The Emperor decided to appoint Earl Russell to lead a detachment for this mission to boost morale and advance the frontier. It might be necessary to take control of the surrounding areas, but it would need justification. Reese waited for her brother to voice his intentions, but he remained silent for some reason. Cayman saw something too ugly. Therefore, there was an urgent need to act. Reese never found out the reason, but she immediately decided to take care of it right away, even sacrificing her sleep before sparks flew. A brother could be scary sometimes. Duke Pond crossed the line today. Not only did he invade the train, but he also frivolously burned Leanna's labors. That sad expression on Cayman's face is something he never wants to see again. Even as an emperor, he dare not take her efforts lightly, and he has decided to lead his troops here, even though it will cause him trouble, due to the fact that it is infiltrating the kingdom without permission. Suddenly, Louis appeared behind him. He wanted to help take revenge and lend his power. Sure, he was trying to get his point across, but no one could hear what he was saying. Louis was just moving in a way that made it seem like Cayman should take him on. And as soon as Cayman touched the hilt of his sword, the sword of ego adjusted to the size of his palm. You could say he recognized it. But obviously, he borrowed the power for the sake of his mistress. A long time ago, they heard a man's voice right from the window, and he was calling for Leanna. Cayman was glad when he heard it, because now he wouldn't have to waste time looking for the Duke. He stood outside with his guards and shouted that the longer Leanna hid, the worse it would be for her. Cayman came out with his soldiers. He said that Leanna had sent to protect her land after the Duke's act, and she would definitely not be here. The Duke was scared. Why are there so many soldiers in this village? And Cayman laughed with the entire Duke's army. He said that if the latter was going to hand out a territorial war, the Empire would not be left out. If something happened to the former Empress, the current Emperor would react extremely. More precisely, he had already reacted like that, and he had no intention of letting the intruders and the tranquility go. Cayman ordered his soldiers to kill anyone who would resist, to punish the intruders. Duke really didn't know what to do. He realized that these people were from the Empire, which means the situation is very bad. First, he decided to get out of here, but he ended up right under the feet of one beautiful woman. Susan couldn't let her brother have any fun alone, though he managed without her. The Duke didn't know who it was, so he started threatening his status. Susan laughed that he didn't even know the face of a princess of the Empire. Then it became clear to him that the person the princess calls her brother was the Emperor. Cayman said sarcastically that he was honored to meet his father-in-law. Leanna roughly assessed the damage to the field and decided to take a break and rest at home. But suddenly she noticed the oil and realized that her father was even going to set her house on fire. If the fire had started while she was sleeping at home, she might die. Even if the Duke considers his child as a tool, how could he go that far? Suddenly, she heard her father's voice outside. She decided to go out and check. Had he really brought the soldiers again? However, she saw something unexpected. Her father was kneeling upright and trembling with fear, and behind him stood Cayman. He had caught the culprit as promised. The Duke started begging for forgiveness and even bowed to the ground. He said he was only doing all this for Leanna's sake, and the crown prince was waiting for her at the castle. She would be happy to be the crown princess. How dare he say that when he's destroyed everything she holds dear? He's making excuses now, apologizing easily, and just as easily setting this arson. Even if Leanna hits him with her anger, his field won't come back. Leanna had thought that if her father asked for forgiveness, her heart might soften. But now she realized that wasn't what she wanted. Cayman offered to make that apology more sincere if it would cheer her up, cook anything she wanted. Now he left it to Leanna to figure out what she wanted. Duke thought that now would definitely be the end of him, if Leanna really had such a relationship with the Emperor. Leanna hated the Duke, but he was still her father. She couldn't forgive him just because of the family ties. The only thing she wanted was to never see the man again, and for him to have nothing to do with her life. Cayman said that the Duke would never appear near Leanna again, or not only he, but also his precious mouth would not be safe. And now he would never appear in front of her again. Now it's really over. After receiving an apology that didn't sound sincere, Leanna felt empty. Still, she was glad Cayman had stood up for her to her father. If she had been alone, she definitely wouldn't have received even such an empty apology, and things would have been much more complicated. And of course, she was very grateful to Louis, for he was also a great help in this matter. He had lent the emperor his power for the sake of his mistress, but he felt like garbage. He wanted to be scolded for cheating on her and letting himself be used by someone else. The damage done was not small, but not that much. Only the watermelon field was damaged and everything else was saved. But still, even for the watermelon, it was very frustrating. After all, they were so delicious. Liena let the situation go. There are always years of bad and good harvests. In times like these, you don't have to give up. You can just start over. A face tanned under the blazing sun, highly knotted hair and rough fingers. Liena looked very different from what her father might have called an elegant young lady, but different didn't mean bad. The current Liena is much better than the one who was a noble lady, and Cayman respects her for living honestly despite the hardships. He wanted to tell her something once they were done with the Duke, and now he was about to say that she was actually the Emperor. But suddenly, this important moment was cut short by Susan, who had been worrying about Liena all along. Moving closer, Susan first quickly wiped Liena's face, and the handkerchief blackened. Liena felt embarrassed that she was still talking to Cayman like this, so she said that she couldn't talk to him right now, and she would listen to what he had to say a little later. She ran off, and he never got a chance to stop her, but all because of Susan, who interrupted a moment like this, the best time to talk. For this day, Liena made tea from jack bean. It is a very unusual ingredient and is good for the respiratory system. All this for the residents of Empire, who helped put out the fire and got smoke inhalation. Today had been a rough day. When sending the notice of registration and marriage proposal to the royal palace, the emperor announced that the Duke would be traveling to the Empire to attend his daughter's wedding. Well, then the emperor is going to leave the Duke in his grandmother's care to do with him as he sees fit. He's damaged her precious things. Funny, the emperor told the kingdom that the Duke would be in the Empire, and he himself locked him up in Postina. Grandmother thought Cayman would forgive the Duke for Liena's sake, but she didn't expect him to solve the problem so skillfully. And you can also use the Duke's soldiers to build Poston's border walls. And even if the kingdom finds out about it, it won't do anything. Grandmother found out that the Sword of Ego had recognized the emperor, and everyone was thrilled. She was proud too. Cayman said that he only helped for the sake of protecting his mistress. But even when the previous emperor was the master of this sword, he wouldn't let Liena even touch it. Perhaps he recognized Cayman as the master as well, but he didn't say so. The important thing was that everything went well. But Cayman hasn't revealed his real identity yet. He's too timid in this case. It seemed like there weren't many difficulties ahead, but a new problem was on the horizon. Consena came to Poston.